There's a reason the 49ers releasing Khalil Herbert caught my attention, and it's not simply because San Francisco decided to move on from a veteran running back after only a couple of weeks. On the surface, this looks like a routine training camp transaction. But when you connect the dots with what's happening around the rest of this running back room, this move starts to tell us something much more interesting about how the 49ers are viewing their roster right now. San Francisco brought Herbert in at the beginning of training camp, gave him an opportunity to compete, and then just like that, he's gone. That's a pretty quick turnaround. Herbert did get work in the preseason opener against Tennessee, but he was never really positioned as the guy who was going to walk into week 1 and suddenly become Christian McCaffrey's primary backup. He was more of a veteran insurance policy, a player who could give the 49ers meaningful reps, while some of their younger backs worked their way back from injuries. And that distinction matters because the timing of his release gives us a pretty good clue about what San Francisco believes is coming next. The 49ers didn't simply wake up one morning and decide they don't need running back depth. They know exactly how important that position is to this offense. Kyle Shanahan's system depends heavily on the running game. And when you've got Christian McCaffrey leading the room, you want capable players behind him because one thing we've learned in the NFL is that depth isn't a luxury, it's survival. So if San Francisco is comfortable releasing Herbert now, there's a reasonable conclusion to draw. The coaching staff must feel pretty good about the progress of the guys who are currently working their way back. And this is where things get really interesting. Jordan James, Kalen Black, and Isaac Guerendo have all been dealing with injuries. And according to the reporting referenced in the source material, those three have been working on the side rather than fully participating in practice. James and Black weren't expected to return to practice immediately, with the possibility of getting back later in the preseason, while Guerendo is also working his way through his own recovery. That doesn't mean everything is suddenly perfect. It doesn't mean all three are guaranteed to be healthy tomorrow. But there's a major difference between a player being completely shut down and a player progressing toward a return. For the 49ers, that distinction could be the entire reason Herbert is no longer on the roster. Think about it from the team's perspective. If Herbert were absolutely essential to getting through the next few weeks, why release him now? Why voluntarily remove a healthy veteran from the room when you already have several injured backs? The simplest answer is that San Francisco believes it has enough confidence in the players coming back that Herbert's roster spot is more valuable elsewhere. And honestly, Niners fan, that's something worth watching, because eventually this isn't going to be a conversation about whether the 49ers have enough running backs to survive August. It's going to be a conversation about who actually earns the right to be McCaffrey's primary backup when the games start counting. That race is wide open. Isaac Guerendo has already shown that he can bring a different physical element to the offense. Jordan James has the opportunity to make a serious impression as a young back, fighting for a larger role. Kalen Black is also part of that competition. And depending on how quickly everyone gets healthy, the preseason reps they're able to accumulate could become incredibly important. But right now, the situation is almost comically thin, with Herbert gone and the injured backs still working their way back. Sincere McCormick and Zamir White are the two healthy running backs available in the situation described by the source material. That could make the upcoming work with the Chargers particularly interesting because the 49ers still have joint practices and a preseason game ahead of them. And if you're wondering how San Francisco gets through those reps, there's another name sitting in the back pocket: Deebo Samuel. Now, Deebo isn't officially a running back, and nobody should interpret this as the 49ers suddenly turning him into a full-time running back. But we've seen enough from Samuel over the years to know that if San Francisco needs to manufacture touches or protect itself against an injury crunch, Shanahan isn't going to be afraid to get creative. That's part of what makes this roster so fascinating. The 49ers have players who can move around the formation, create mismatches, and give Shanahan options when Plan A gets punched in the mouth. Still, you don't want to build your week 1 running back room around emergency options. You want McCaffrey healthy, you want the younger backs healthy, and you want enough depth behind them that one injury doesn't suddenly turn the entire position into a weekly guessing game. That's why the Herbert release actually feels more positive than negative to me. It suggests the 49ers aren't panicking. They're looking at the players they have, they're monitoring the injury recoveries, and they're apparently comfortable enough with what they're seeing to move on from a veteran who was brought in as insurance. Now, here's where I want your opinion, because this running back battle could get very interesting once everyone is back on the field. If you had to pick the guy right now to become McCaffrey's RB2, who are you taking? Isaac Guerendo, Jordan James, or Kalen Black? Put that name in the comments because I'm especially interested in seeing whether Niners fans are already starting to form a consensus. And there's still one giant piece of this story we haven't gotten to yet: Christian McCaffrey. Because while Herbert's release tells us something about the team's confidence in its depth, McCaffrey's current situation is the part that can completely change the conversation. He didn't play in the preseason opener, which by itself isn't particularly surprising. Veteran stars often don't need preseason reps, especially when the coaching staff already knows exactly what they can do. But McCaffrey has also been dealing with what the 49ers have described as muscle tightness. And considering what happened during the 2024 season, you already know why Niners fans are going to have their antennas up. That's where the story takes another turn. Because suddenly, people weren't just asking when McCaffrey would return to practice. They were asking whether something bigger could be happening behind the scenes. And that brings us to the contract speculation, the running back market, and why the timing of this entire situation was just strange enough to get people talking. But before we get there, remember this. The 49ers didn't release Herbert because they suddenly stopped caring about running back depth. They released him because they appear to believe the guys already in the building are going to be healthy enough to make that depth matter. Now we need to find out whether that confidence is justified. Now let's get to Christian McCaffrey, because this is where the conversation around the 49ers running back room gets a lot more complicated. McCaffrey didn't play against the Titans, and again, that alone isn't something that should set off every alarm in the building. This is preseason. The 49ers know what McCaffrey can do. Nobody needs to see him take 20 carries in August just to confirm that he's still one of the best running backs in football. The part that matters is that McCaffrey has also been dealing with what the team has described as muscle tightness, and he hasn't been participating fully in practice. For any other player, you might look at that and say, okay, veteran maintenance, let's move on. For McCaffrey, though, the context changes everything. We've already watched him miss significant time in the past because of injuries, and Niners fans remember how quickly a seemingly manageable situation can become a major storyline. So when McCaffrey isn't practicing, people are naturally going to ask questions. Is this serious? Is the team being overly cautious? Is there something we're not being told? And then came one particularly interesting theory. Could this be a hold-in? That idea sounds strange at first, but it didn't come completely out of nowhere. The running back market changed dramatically this offseason, and McCaffrey's contract suddenly looks very different compared with some of the massive deals handed out to other elite young running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson both received enormous extensions, and we're talking about contracts that pushed the market to a completely different level. Gibbs received a 3-year deal worth $67.5 million, with additional upside taking the maximum value even higher. Robinson landed a deal in a similar neighborhood. Now take a step back and look at McCaffrey. He's still under contract with San Francisco for 2 more seasons, with free agency coming after that. And if you're McCaffrey, it's not unreasonable to look around the league and notice that the market just moved. That's why the speculation started. Maybe McCaffrey wasn't dealing with an injury at all. Maybe he was simply choosing not to participate because he wanted his contract situation addressed. But here's the important part, Niners fan. That theory was knocked down. Ian Rappaport specifically pushed back on the idea that McCaffrey's situation was some kind of contract hold-in. The message was pretty clear. This is actual muscle tightness, not a fake injury being used as leverage, and there wasn't an indication that it was something fans should be panicking about. That distinction matters, because once you remove the hold-in theory, we're left with the simplest explanation. McCaffrey is dealing with some tightness, the 49ers are being careful with him, and the team expects him to work his way back. And frankly, that's the approach you want. Think about where we are in the calendar. This isn't week 17. This isn't the playoffs. This isn't even the regular season. There is absolutely no reason for San Francisco to push McCaffrey through a questionable situation in August just so he can get a handful of preseason snaps. None. You'd rather have McCaffrey miss preseason practices in August and arrive at week 1 feeling fresh, then watch him get pushed unnecessarily, suffer a setback, and suddenly have everyone asking why the 49ers took that risk in the first place. That's the bigger picture. But at the same time, we shouldn't completely dismiss what we're seeing. There's a difference between saying don't panic and saying there's nothing to monitor. We absolutely should monitor it. McCaffrey's health is one of the biggest variables on the entire 49ers. Offense. When he's on the field, Shanahan can build the game plan around him in ways that few teams can replicate. He can line up in the backfield, motion out of it, catch passes, run inside, bounce outside, and force defenses to account for him before the ball is even snapped. That's what makes McCaffrey so valuable. He's not simply a guy who gets 20 carries. He's a chess piece. And when that chess piece isn't practicing, naturally, everybody starts looking at the board. The good news is that the reporting surrounding his absence has been reassuring. The expectation in the source material is that McCaffrey could return to practice soon, potentially this week. And that's where the Herbert release becomes even more interesting. Remember what we talked about earlier? The 49ers let go of Herbert despite the fact that the running back room is currently dealing with injuries. That move makes a lot more sense if the team believes McCaffrey is close to returning and the other injured backs are progressing as expected. In other words, San Francisco may not be looking at the room and seeing a crisis. They might be looking at it and seeing a temporary traffic jam. You've got McCaffrey dealing with muscle tightness. You've got Guerrero, James, and Black working their way back. You've got McCormick and White available right now. And you've got Deebo Samuel capable of giving the offense another layer of flexibility if absolutely necessary. That's a very different situation from having no plan at all. Now, here's where I think the contract conversation gets interesting. I wouldn't expect the 49ers to suddenly tear up McCaffrey's contract tomorrow simply because Gibbs and Robinson got paid. The 49ers have already made a significant financial commitment to McCaffrey, and there are still 2 years remaining on his current deal. But should the team eventually have a conversation about his contract? That's a legitimate question. McCaffrey has already established his value in San Francisco. When he's healthy, he's one of the most important players on the roster, and his versatility gives Shanahan a weapon that changes how defenses have to prepare. At the same time, running back contracts are always complicated. That's the uncomfortable truth. Teams love elite running backs, but they also know how quickly the position can become difficult financially because of workload, injuries, age, and positional value. A team has to balance appreciation for what a player has, accomplished with the reality of what comes next. And McCaffrey will eventually reach that conversation. But that doesn't mean this current injury situation is automatically connected to it. That's where you have to separate the two stories. The injury is one story, the contract market is another. They happen to collide at the same time, and that's what made the speculation explode. So, Niners fan, here's the question I really want you to think about. If you were running the 49ers, would you give McCaffrey another major contract now, or would you let the current deal play out and revisit everything later? Because there isn't an obvious answer. Pay him early, and you're betting on one of the most dynamic offensive players in football continuing to produce at an elite level. Wait, and you potentially risk the market becoming even more expensive. But there's another side to this that matters just as much. McCaffrey doesn't need to prove anything in the preseason. That's why I'd be much more interested in watching what happens over the next few practices than worrying about how many snaps he gets against the Chargers. Does he return to practice? Does he participate fully? Does the muscle tightness disappear? Does the coaching staff continue managing his workload? Those are the signals that matter. And if McCaffrey gets back on the field without any setbacks, suddenly the entire complexion of this running back room changes. The 49ers could go from a position that looks dangerously thin right now to a position that has legitimate competition for the backup job behind one of the best players in football. That's why Herbert's release isn't necessarily bad news. In fact, it might be one of the quietest positive indicators we've seen from this situation. San Francisco is betting on its own roster. Now that's a bet we're going to find out very soon whether the 49ers were right to make. Because once the injured backs return, the competition is going to get real. And That's when this running back room stops being about surviving preseason practices and starts becoming about deciding who gets meaningful snaps when the games actually count. That's the part of this story I'm watching most closely. That brings us to the bigger question: what does this running back room actually look like when the 49ers get to week 1? Because right now, it's easy to look at the roster and think there's a problem. McCaffrey isn't practicing consistently. Guerendo, Jordan James, and Kalen Black are working their way back. Khalil Herbert is gone. And for the moment, the group of healthy backs is much thinner than you would normally expect this late in the preseason. But that's where you have to separate the current snapshot from the roster San Francisco expects to have when the season actually begins. The preseason roster isn't the finished product. It's a laboratory. The 49ers are testing combinations, managing workloads, evaluating young players, and trying to figure out which pieces are actually going to help them win football games when the lights come on. And right now, the biggest thing the 49ers need isn't another veteran running back simply for the sake of having another name on the roster. They need their injured players to keep progressing. If Jordan James, Kalen Black, and Isaac Guerendo can get back onto the practice field soon and build some momentum, the entire picture changes. Suddenly, McCaffrey has multiple players competing behind him. And that's exactly what you want, because nobody should assume McCaffrey is going to receive every meaningful running back snap for the entire season. That's not realistic, especially when you're trying to keep an elite player healthy over a full NFL schedule. The ideal scenario is actually pretty straightforward. McCaffrey remains the centerpiece. One of the younger backs emerges as the clear RB2. Another back becomes a reliable rotational option. And the 49ers have enough depth that they don't have to panic every time somebody leaves the field holding a hamstring. That's the goal. The question is, which player earns that second spot? And honestly, I think that's one of the most fascinating position battles on this roster. Isaac Guerendo has already given the 49ers reason to believe he can be useful in this offense. He's got the physical tools to be more than just a guy taking meaningless preseason carries. Jordan James has an opportunity to force his way into the conversation. Kalen Black has the same opportunity. And then you have Sincere McCormick and Zamir White currently getting the benefit of being healthy while some of those other players recover. That's why the next couple of weeks are going to be important. Not because we need to see McCaffrey run for 100 yards in a preseason game. We don't. What we need to see is the entire room begin to come together. The 49ers also have joint practices with the Chargers, and those sessions could tell us more than a preseason game ever could. Why? Because joint practices give coaches the chance to evaluate players against another team's starters and rotational players in a controlled environment. A running back can show how he handles pass protection. He can show whether he hits the right gap. He can demonstrate his ability to catch the football. He can show whether he understands the protections and assignments. And for a young player fighting for RB2, those details matter. You don't win that job simply by breaking one 40-yard run against a bunch of players who might not make the roster. You win it by showing the coaching staff that when the game is tight in December and McCaffrey needs a breather, you're not going to blow an assignment and put Brock Purdy in a bad situation. That's real football logic. The 49ers need reliability. They need explosiveness, sure. But reliability is what earns trust, and that's especially important in Shanahan's offense. So if you're watching Niners news today and you're looking at the box score from the Chargers game, don't just look at rushing yards. Watch how these backs move. Watch their vision. Watch their patience. Watch their pass protection. Watch what happens when they don't have the ball. Those are the little details that can determine who actually makes the roster. And then there's the question of whether San Francisco should sign another running back after releasing Herbert. I wouldn't completely rule it out. NFL rosters change constantly during training. Camp. Injuries happen, players become available, a veteran gets released by another team. Suddenly, a player who wasn't even on your radar becomes an option. So if the 49ers believe they need another body for camp, they can absolutely make another move. But I wouldn't interpret Herbert's release as a sign that the team is abandoning the running back room. Quite the opposite. The move appears to indicate that the 49ers believe the current group has enough potential, provided those injured players continue progressing. And that's the key phrase, provided they continue progressing, because this is still football. Things can change in one practice. One awkward tackle can completely rearrange a depth chart. That's why you don't celebrate an injury report in August. And you don't panic over one either. You watch the trend. And right now, the trend described in this situation is encouraging. The injured backs are moving toward a return. McCaffrey's muscle tightness has reportedly been viewed as legitimate, but not something that should cause major concern. Herbert is gone. And the 49ers are apparently comfortable moving forward with the players they have. That doesn't guarantee everything will work. It does, however, tell you what the organization believes. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this entire situation. The 49ers aren't trying to build their running back room for August. They're building it for the season. That's why week 1 matters so much more than what happens Thursday night. The opener against the Rams in Australia is where this finally becomes real. That's when the 49ers need to know who they can trust. That's when McCaffrey needs to be healthy. That's when the RB2 battle needs to have a clearer answer. And that's when all of these preseason decisions start making sense. If San Francisco gets to that game with McCaffrey healthy, Guerendo, James, and Black healthy enough to contribute, and a clear second option established, then nobody is gonna care that Khalil Herbert was released in August. It'll barely be a footnote. But if injuries continue piling up, then suddenly this quiet roster move becomes much more significant. That's why I'm not panicking right now. I'm watching. There's a difference. And I think that's the right approach for you as a Niners fan too. Don't ignore what's happening, but don't turn every preseason injury update into a 5-alarm emergency. The 49ers have options. They have young players coming back. They have McCaffrey, they have Debo's versatility, and they still have plenty of time before the games actually count. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the 49ers made the right call releasing Khalil Herbert, or would you have kept him around until the injured running backs were officially back at practice? And more importantly, when everybody is healthy, who do you think wins the RB2 job behind Christian McCaffrey? If you're taking Guerendo, say Guerendo. If you're backing Jordan James, say James. If you think Kalen Black is the guy, say Black. Let's see where the Niners fan base stands, because that competition could become one of the more interesting battles of the preseason. And keep an eye on McCaffrey too. If he returns to practice without any setbacks, that's going to be one of the biggest pieces of positive news this running back room can get. Because ultimately, everything starts with him. The 49ers don't need Christian McCaffrey to prove he's a superstar in August. They need him healthy when the Rams are standing across from them in week 1. That's the finish line. And if the 49ers can get there with their running back room healthy, this could go from a position that looked thin for a few weeks to one of the deeper and more dangerous units on the offense. That's why this story isn't really about Khalil Herbert. It's about confidence. It's about health. And it's about whether the 49ers believe the players they've already invested in are ready to take the next step. Right now, the signs are encouraging, but we're not at the finish line yet. So if you want more San Francisco 49ers news as these roster battles develop, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on notifications. We're working toward 2,000 subscribers, and every subscription helps this Niners news community keep growing. Hit the like button if you want to see the 49ers enter week 1 with this entire running back room healthy, and share this video with another Niners fan who needs to know what's happening with McCaffrey and the rest of the backfield. And don't forget, this is Niners News Today, so when another roster move happens, when McCaffrey returns to practice, or when that RB2 battle finally starts separating itself from the pack, we'll be here breaking it all down. The big question now is simple. Can the 49ers get everybody healthy before week 1? And which running back do you trust to step up when McCaffrey needs a breather? Let me know what you think. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.